Okay, I'm Greg Stach. I am the owner of Lewis and Clark Lake Vineyard. We bought this land in 1985, planted corn and soybeans first couple of years, and then started with grapes down in that corner and worked our way. Now we're 15 acres of wine grapes and 15, 20 acres of hayland, and we're biodynamic certified right now, probably the only one in South Dakota. Just a brief word on biodynamics because you may not know much about it, but it was something started about 100 years ago in Switzerland and Austria and that region of the world. But biodynamics, just simply, it's regenerative agriculture in its highest form. There is a planting calendar that you're familiar with, the Farmer's Almanac. Well, this is the biodynamic calendar, but part of what we do is if you're certified regenerative organic or biodynamic, you can't just put anything on you want, even if it's registered as okay for organic, OMRI listed. You can't use that necessarily. Everything has to be approved. But that's really true for regenerative organic or organic. You have an input list, you submit that, I have to submit a label of everything I use, and the difference with biodynamics is you make a lot of your products. So I take grass, alfalfa, thistle, hemp, dandelion, any of these, usually one at a time, and I fill 55-gallon barrels of chopped material. And I put water in it, and I put a handful or a shovelful of my vermicompost right here and close the lid. And 4 months later, you've got a liquid. It smells a little bit, but that liquid is what I have analyzed here. And what I'm looking for, I want to have something that has calcium on it. Grapes need a lot of potassium. They need some other products, of course, like all the cations. Phosphorus is needed, but there isn't much in there in some of these, and then all the micronutrients. And what you find is, if you see this page and the next page, there's 3 different materials I have had analyzed. I did this on my own. I don't think I'd have to have it analyzed in order to remain certified biodynamic, but I did it because I can see which of these has what strengths and which one has something that maybe would be better if I use something else. Well, it turns out that dandelion beats everything. And so I have a little walk behind bagger mower in the spring, and I fill up 3 55-gallon barrel drums just full of bagged dandelion. And I put that in the barrel, fill it with water, put a handful, I use lactic acid bacteria, which I make myself from rice wash water and milk, but you put some of that in a half a gallon, and then you put in a shovelful of your vermicompost, because you see I use that just about everywhere, and you close the lid. It's an anaerobic digestion, and it off gases into a pop-off cork, and in the end, this is what you get. Turns out that if you want to read this, if you look at the FPJ dandelion, the first one up there, if you look at the one for under cations, look up their calcium and potassium, 2,000 parts per million for calcium. Well, that's milligrams per liter, so it's 2 grams of calcium per liter of that liquid. And if I want to put on at least 1 gallon, so that's about 4 liters, so more than that. But if I put that much on, then I'm going to put on 8 grams of calcium and almost 8 grams potassium. Well, that turns out that's pretty darn good plant food, because I need proof to show the certifier, and they look it over, and when you have a certification event, you're going to get some inspector will come on. In our case, it's about 5 hours. And they spend about 2 hours at your table looking over all your records, your inputs. They already have this information, but they want to make sure they see that you're following. So proof of what products you're using, you actually show them. I showed them the worm bins. We had to dig around in that. Then I come out here, then we dig in the soil in a couple spots. How crumbly is the soil? What's it smell like? How many worms do you count in that shovelful? All that kind of general, that's the kind of inspection. They look over my spray mix area here. There's a lot of skepticism around natural farming, and there was for me. I was quite worried. I started this in earnest in 2016, and 2017 full bore, and it took a while to build up my confidence, because if you grow grapes, you know you can lose your crop the last week due to disease, not counting the birds and all the other problems you can have, but this stuff really does work. This is a tree fix tie, and it's got a big whale tail up there, and when you put them around something, they stay. This kind has a much smaller tail, and they do not stay. And this is what I use, these ag lock ties, except this has got ultraviolet resistance, and these things you can use and reuse 100 times. And so I always tie these pretty loosely, and I don't think I've ever had a problem with these. But trees all started out with Kim Green bush, and it was a system that developed off of the Spanish bush system, and so it's pedestrian orchard, what it is. And so the idea is that for any given rootstock, and you can see that that tree is twice as vigorous as this tree. And so you'll learn this as you experiment with these things. And the apple grower may want to step forward here, because I've got some important things for you to notice. The difference is you leave so many uprights as a way to control the vigor of the whole root system. Okay, so right now you grow these things in the spring and in the summer, and you want them to grow upwards like this, so you get a lot of side branch. And then in September, if you want to convert this system, you lay this down while there's still enough turgor left in the sap and whatnot, so it can bend without breaking. And then you tie this thing down. But notice what I've done here. I've got a shoot here, and a shoot here, and a shoot. Well, these are all going to be mini limbs, much like the system that you're using, Joe. You've got this high density, but a system that's high density, what do they call that, your system? What's that training system? You have trees 3 feet apart. Yeah, I forget. But anyway, what I do here, yeah, slender spindle, yeah. So it's hard to imagine this, because this is the first year of conversion, but I'm going to tell you what's going to happen here. I tied all these up here to vertical, and so I'm leaving them more dense than they need to be, because I can always cut them off. But this winter, when I winter prune, I'm going to probably take this off either right here or even possibly right here, because or maybe leave this and cut this off, and I'll tie these back. And so what I'll have come spring is maybe one of these uprights left in place like this, and I'll simplify it. Now what that means is simplifying in terms of training is all these laterals got to be cut back to a stub. So I stub it here, stub this one. I never cut it right back to the crotch angle, because what you're going to want, especially on peaches, is you want some regrowth. So you leave about an inch, 2-inch stub, not that particular. And so, but for everything else, if I cut this one limb, I get rid of all of this growth. This one stays as the grandpa of the group. And all of these other limbs that you see tied up, I know they don't look like limbs, but next year this time, these things will be up here. My goal, this is about 7 foot, I want a pedestrian orchard. I don't want, you notice I put in wires up to 10 foot. I changed my mind about that, because the training system lets me do that. What's happening is the vigor that is causing this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 limbs. Now, on a 10-foot tree spacing, I can get 12 limbs. And they're all going to be like this, and here, and here. And if I don't prune these, they're going to shoot clear up 3 feet. And when I come here next year at this time, you're going to have a wall of limbs. And it's going to devigor the whole tree. Now let me show you why we prune like this. Here's another one, very vigorous tree. Notice I laid this limb down. I've got uprights about every 8, 10 inches, 12 inches. Same on this side. And at the end, I tied this one up. The last extension should always go up. Now, I've got a lot of thick limbs right in there. And you can see how tall they are. This is a champion tree grower, this particular variety. Now, it's winter time coming, and where's all the sap from all these limbs? Where's it going to go? It will go down in the roots, okay? So next year, the first 3 weeks of growth, all the growth that's going to come out and shoot all those buds is going to come from that sap that's in those roots. And so I like this height. I can tie up there. Let me show you how to tie these, because you cannot tie this directly to a wire. What I've learned with these is I'll tie it on this side, I'll loop it around like this, and then twist it once. I pull this guy up. And remember, I chose a spot where I want it, not where the limb wants to go. Now if you look at that, that's directly in contact with the rubber. Let's go down here and we'll show you how you train one of these. Let's say that I planted a tree right here, and I put a stake in the ground because I use a stake on everything. And I tie it here, and this is my cordon wire, 32 inches. When I get that tree planted, I cut it down here at 18 inches or 15 inches probably, because I want to have at least a foot from where this heading cut is to the cordon wire. Now this is a training string, so if I cut this thing off about right here, the tree, and I let the shoots come out, they come out like they will in a month. They're going to be long enough, then you start tying it to here. So I come out here, as soon as this thing gets about this tall in August or September, then I cut this off and I lay this thing down. Now I have an option. I can go like this, take it and go this way, but you got to be mindful of that big radius, 12-inch radius bend. Like right here, you got blind buds. And this is what this kind of training system is meant to prevent. So what you do, you're protecting against the auxins that are coming from the tip that cause the thing to stop these buds from growing. And so well, this one has some growth, but let's say you wanted some growth here. You take a pruner and just go about a ½ inch up, and you go from here to here, here to here, and just make a mark with your pruner. Some people, you know, that's as much as you do. Some people make a more of an open notch, a pretty wide notch. I've had good luck just a single
3/4.
Yeah, you don't want to go all the way around just to protect this bud. What's happening then, all the auxins that come there, auxins want to make the tree grow out. So they send back hormones that doesn't let these buds produce. But what happens when you get rid of the hormones from the tip is the cytokinins from the base come up here. Oh, there's no hormone up there, so push this bud. It heals over in a month. You wouldn't even know it's hardly there. And by gosh, that really works. If you've got blind spots, you can really take care of that on any age tree. Now here's some mix of cherries and pears and whatnot, and we'll finish shortly here, but here's some limbs that have been laid down. And you know, I just pulled it down, and I'll have to, these aren't tied right, but this winter, I'll cut this guy off here. Notice I'll always leave a stub 6 inches, 8 inches, because you're going to get 2 shoots coming out of there, and you're going to save 1 or 2. And then that on this tree, that's all you're going to have to do, because every one of these guys are coming up. These will produce, this is already like a North Star, so it's going to have a natural dwarfing habitat. That's all, you're not going to get a huge amount of growth. Now down here, take a look at some of these guys. These are all cherries. So this limb bent over pretty nicely, and I've got some strong growth there, and this will grow. And I've got to learn the system. Should I leave these things a foot apart or 8 inches apart? How much is a deep vigor? Do I need to leave more? But notice I'm going 10 foot between trees. And they're all going to be productive. And all the way to the base because it's got sunlight. That's more important than you realize. Now, all this vigor, I'm going to cut this guy about right here, probably. And it'll send shoots out, but all of this stuff, how many 5-gallon buckets of sap do you think that's going to fill up from just what this limb produced for photosynthesis? And all that's going to go. Now what you're creating here, essentially, are water sprouts. And if you've ever seen a water sprout grow on a pear or an apple tree, boom, 8 feet, pretty easy. And I got to study this, but I think that the Koreans are onto something. When they get done with something like this for the growth, so this thing came somewhere right here, it started. They say that a lot of times you get blank wood down here and unfruitful, not so much in cherries, but apples, unfruitful wood here for 2 years, when really it ought to be, this year's growth ought to let these buds all develop into flower buds, and next year they should be fruit. What they do, interestingly, they take about half this growth off and leave it in place, and then what do you see? This whole base part becomes flowers the next year, where it might or might not have. A lot of times you can go 3 years with nothing on here, and on a spindle you cannot have that because you plant them on 3-foot centers because you want fruit. And on cherries, it's pretty clockwork. First year growth, second year growth, these set flowers, and that's it. And you have to renew them like that. So you can see a lot of growth here.
Welcome to Steps to Organic Certification for Orchards and Vineyards. Step 1 process in transitioning to organic certification for orchards and vineyards is understanding organic certification. Certification ensures that your farming practices comply with the USDA National Organic Program, which is 7 CFR Part 205. It focuses on ecological balance, biodiversity, and avoidance of prohibited substances, and certification is a process-based claim, not a pesticide-free claim. There are 3 basic claims used in the marketplace: 100% organic, which contains at least 95% organic ingredients, and then made with organic, which contains about 70% or more organic ingredients. There are several different organizations that play a role in the process. There's the certification specialist. These work for the certifying agencies, and they're often responsible for receiving your application, reviewing your documentation, and sometimes taking the decision on whether you're approved for organic certification or not. The next step in the process is really understanding your transition timeline. The next step in the operation is understanding your transition timeline. Land that is free from prohibited substances for 36 months is eligible for certification. If you have non-organic perennial stock, but it's been managed organically for 12 months before harvest, it is eligible to transition in. Retroactive certification is not allowed, and you can choose from three different scopes. The third step in the transition process is to develop an organic system plan. You'd need to identify the fields that you wish to transition. You would need to identify all the inputs that you have used in your operation in the last 3 years and currently. And you will need to complete a prior 3-year land use history. You'll need to create maps of all your farm plots, establish your field buffer zones and drift mitigation based on risk. There is no minimum size or maximum size for buffer zones. Kind of the unwritten rule is 30 feet, but 30 feet may not be adequate and you may need to increase them based on risk. And then maintaining detailed records of all inputs and management practices, all your receipts and input purchase records, harvest and sales records. Step 4 is building your record-keeping system. You are required to keep 5 years of input logs, invoices, and certificates once you're certified. There are approximately 15 USDA National Organic Program certifying agencies operating in South Dakota. You are free to choose from any number of certifying agencies. Fee schedules are all different and depend on several different factors. Your certifying agency will set those fee schedules and provide you that information when you inquire upon certification. There is usually an application fee that's based on your scope that you choose, either crops, livestock, or handling, or all three. And there is a certification fee that's based on sales that you have to pay every year. Now, the application fee is a one-time fee, whereas the certification fee is paid every year. And then there's often an inspection fee, which is subject to travel costs. Rules for transplants. Usually, annual crops have to use certified organic transplants. Perennials, non-organic transplants are allowed only if organic is unavailable, but they do need to be managed organically for at least 12 months before harvest. There are rules for grafting. Grafting is permitted under the National Organic Program. Non-organic rootstock is allowed if organic is not commercially available, but managed organically for at least 12 months prior to the organic harvest. All grafting materials must be approved, including sealants and wraps, and you do need to sanitize tools with only allowed materials. There is an input approval process that you will work with your certifier on. Inputs do need to be pre-approved by your certifier before you use them, and they do all need to be included with your organic system plan. You will fill out an inputs list as part of your organic system plan when you submit that to your certifier for initial certification and upon renewal. You do need to submit product labels and justification before each use, so you can't just put a product in your orchard or use it on your plants. You do need to justify why you're using it on your plants. If formulations change, you do need to re-verify that with the certifier, and you do need to keep invoices and lot numbers for traceability on all of the inputs that you use, as well as keeping all of your receipts. If you're making your own inputs, you do also need to get those pre-approved by the certifier. There is an organization called the Organic Material Review Institute, also known as OMRI. OMRI lists inputs compliant with NOP standards, and they also list some with restrictions. OMRI, just because it's OMRI listed, doesn't mean it's automatically approved for use on your farm. The USDA NOP does maintain a national list of approved substances. It specifies allowed synthetics and prohibited natural inputs. Examples that are allowed include sulfur, copper with restrictions, and oils and soaps and pheromones. Biologicals such as Bt and Bacillus subtilis products and micronutrient deficiencies must be identified and documented through methods like soil tests and plant tissue analysis. Synthetic micronutrients like sulfates, carbonates, oxides, or silicates of zinc, copper, iron, manganese, selenium, and cobalt are allowed. Pre-existing treated lumber in orchards is allowed and can be grandfathered in. There also is a national list of prohibited substances. These are examples of some of these are synthetic herbicides like glyphosate, systemic fungicides and insecticides, genetically modified organisms, ionizing radiation. New installation of treated lumber contacting crops and soil is not allowed, and micronutrients made from nitrates or chlorides are not allowed. You can only apply raw manure 120 days pre-harvest on food grade products that are coming in contact with the soil. And you do need to balance soil nutrients with tests and only apply allowed micronutrients with documented deficiencies. Some best practices for weed management in an orchard: livestock grazing with some restrictions. You do need to avoid compaction and you need to respect pre-harvest intervals. Physical barriers are allowed. Cultivation, mowing, and mulching is allowed. In organic orchards, mulches of wood chips, straw, compost are commonly recommended to block light and suppress weeds, but you have to be cautious on those hot spots. Wood chips can add or change your biota in your soil. In vineyards, use of shredded vine pruning debris or spent mushroom compost as mulch have shown influence on weed pressure and soil variables. One study of orchards using traditional and cover crop derived mulches found benefits for weed suppression and soil health. And living mulch is a known concept in agroecology and sometimes used in tree crop systems to suppress weeds. Some best practices for pest and disease control: scouting regularly, maintaining records of those thresholds, cultural practices such as pruning for airflow and choosing resistant varieties, and allowed materials include oil, soaps, copper, and sulfur should be used with caution. For drift and contamination control, the primary rule is if a prohibited pesticide residue is detected, it must be below 5% of the EPA's tolerance for that substance. The default limit, if the EPA has not established a specific tolerance for a particular crop and pesticide combination, the default limit is 0.01 ppm or 10 parts per billion. The USDA requires certifiers to conduct random testing and targeted residue testing to ensure these standards are being met. Some best practices for water and soil erosion is maintaining that ground cover to prevent erosion, scheduling irrigation to balance fruit quality and disease management, and avoid compaction with traffic control. And some best practices in food safety with livestock integration, applying manure. Just remember to apply manure. Remember to apply manure within those NOP food safety rules, and document grazing intervals and using block maps, and integrate livestock for cover control, but make sure you protect those tree trunks. So on the inspection day preparation, the inspector is going to be looking at your records. He will also walk around your orchards and looking at your buffer zones and how you prevent contamination to your fruit trees or your vineyard. And then you'll also need to demonstrate traceability systems and that you've used clean equipment for the processing and harvesting. Some resources and support: the Transition to Organic Partnership Program, TOPPs, in the Plains region. And just remember, for harvesting, sales, and tracking rules, that harvested products must be clearly identified and separated from non-organic products. And you do need to maintain lot numbers and harvest records for each block or field. And post-harvest handling must avoid contact with prohibited substances. And storage areas must be clean, documented, and identified, and free from prohibited residues. And sales records must trace product from harvest to buyer. Labels must include certifier name and accurate organic claim. For more information, contact the South Dakota Specialty Producers Association Organic Ag Transition Advisor. I'm Dr. Angela Jackson, and thank you for joining us today.